Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to start our second session, and this session will focus on the illicit trafficking of cultural property and its devastating and irreversible impact in Ukraine and beyond, as well as explore measures to counter such crimes. Moderator of this discussion is Wayne George KC, Managing Partner of GRC, Deputy Lead Coordinator of ACA. Mr. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for attending this panel. I'm delighted about this panel because we're really going to dive deep into what is happening in the field in terms of trying to combat the trafficking of looting cultural goods, not only in Ukraine but also outside of Ukraine through other conventions and other mechanisms. So I think we're all going to learn quite a lot today about the important issue of how do we prevent it, how do we investigate these crimes, how do we get closer to some kind of accountability. Of course, we're talking about war crimes, we're talking about crimes against humanity, and we're talking about genocide, but we're also talking about ordinary crimes, trafficking of cultural artifacts during non-war situations, as well as during the Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine. So without further ado, let me move straight to the panelists. We have Alexei Homenko, First Deputy Prosecutor General of Ukraine. We have Yevhen Rusinov, Deputy Head of the Main Investigation Department of the Security Service of Ukraine. We have Vitaly Kasap, Deputy Director of the International Police Cooperation Department of the National Police of Ukraine. And finally, last but not least, Arsheth Verk, Head of the Office of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So each speaker will speak for approximately 7 or so minutes, and then hopefully we'll have at least a few minutes left for discussion, although I know lunch is looming ahead of us at 1 o'clock, so time is short. So moving straight to Alexei Homenko, the First Deputy Prosecutor General of Ukraine. He's been working in the prosecutor's office for more than 20 years and was head of the Kiev Regional Prosecutor's Office. After the beginning of the full-scale aggression, he's been engaged in the investigation of war crimes in the Kiev region. Since September 2022, he's been the Deputy Prosecutor General, and since January 2023, the First Deputy Prosecutor General. So, Alexei, let's start with the scale of the stolen and destroyed cultural heritage in Ukraine. What is the scale, and how are such crimes documented and investigated?
Доброго дня, шановні учасники даного поважного заходу і край.
Good morning, dear participants, to this very important event. Dear participants, dear Mr. Wayne, I can remember our first meeting which took place in Borodyanka near the bust of Taras Shevchenko, which was heavily damaged. It happened shortly after the liberation of the Kiev region. It was quite long ago, and as of today we can already state that Russia targets not only our civil objects, our infrastructure, but also our cultural heritage sites. I first came across Russia's crime against cultural heritage after the full-scale invasion, where I was head of the Kiev City Prosecutor's Office. I can remember the very beginning of the war, where Russia started heavily shelling our civil objects, infrastructure, military objects, and 5 days after the beginning of the full-scale invasion in this city, in the town of Ivankiv, the cultural lore museum, which hosted pieces by famous Ukrainian artist Maria Primachenko, got under attack, and many of pieces were destroyed. Shortly after that, Russians demonstrated that they have nothing saint left in them, because as a result of massive shelling, the museum dedicated to the liberation of Kiev in 1943 got heavily damaged. You all remember Russian methodology about the Second World War. It is something which is very important to them, which is basics of their key narratives. And in the meantime, they do not hesitate to put under attack even the objects which are expected to be important for them. In the previous slide, you could see the museum of Maria Primachenko. In this slide, you can see what Russians did to Hrihori Skovoroda Museum in Kharkiv region. You may also know that as a result of the 1st of January attack, the museum of Roman Chukevich in the city of Lviv was destroyed. In the meantime, the dormitories where Stepan Bandera used to live when studying at the university. Both are prominent figures for Ukrainian rebellion movement who fought against Russia and the Soviet Empire. In the meantime, can you imagine these people launching missiles in order to fight with the deads? So they are launching these rockets in order to, not in order to destroy some infrastructural objects or military objects. No, not at all. They are aiming at what is important and symbolic for Ukrainians. By the way, if we analyze what Russians do to Ukrainian cultural heritage, there are two patterns. So what they cannot appropriate, they destroy it. What they can reach, they appropriate it. They tell that this is theirs. And the second pattern became clearly evident after Russians occupied the Crimean Peninsula. Hundreds and thousands of objects, cultural objects, were taken away from Crimea and removed to other parts of Russia, where these items were presented as belonging to Russia since a long time. Such an appropriation became an object of criminal investigation launched by Ukrainian prosecutorial authorities, which was taken over by the by the prosecutor's office of the International Criminal Court, and the respective international proceedings was launched before the full-scale invasion. Besides, after the full-scale invasion, Russians continued pillaging and looting of museums and other cultural objects. In particular, they took away pieces by Ivan Ivazovsky from the museum in the city of Mariupol. They continue doing the same in many of the occupied territories. So the transportation was done without due precautions in the same manner as they were taken away washing machines and other pieces of property. So obviously they do not make any distinction between washing machines and pieces of art. Besides, there are multiple facts of cultural heritage objects being under attack in the territories which are in the close proximity to the areas where hostilities take place. Such attacks take place with full awareness of Russian top military and political management. In the meantime, Russians remove children from Ukrainian territories, and all this is done with the authorization and again in full awareness of Russian decision makers. All these crimes are being duly recorded, and in this connection I cannot but express my appreciation to our international partners who support Ukrainian national authorities on the way of investigation and prosecution of such crimes. In particular, there are close relations of cooperation with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We need to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that homicide is the crime. Homicides are investigated in the first place, especially when it comes to some massive killings. The next priority is ecocide, sexual violence cases, but despite these evident priorities, prosecutors and investigators do their best in order to pay due attention to crimes against cultural heritage. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Very much, Alexei. And of course, it's important to remember that these crimes, which Alexei has spoken very eloquently about, did not begin at the full-scale invasion. They began in 2014. And we have Yevhen Rusinov, who can speak about this. He's the deputy head of the main investigations department of the Security Service of Ukraine. He's worked in investigations for 20 years, and before working for the OPG, he worked in Donetsk and Luhansk, where he was investigating crimes from 2014. So, Yevhen, could you speak about these crimes which you've looked at? Who has been responsible from 2014? What kind of criminal groups have been involved? What kind of valuables have been taken from Ukraine, and so on?
Good day, dear attendants of the conference, dear colleagues, dear partners. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation and for a chance to be here and to talk to you as the representatives of the State Security Service. It's a good opportunity to talk to real professionals in this field. I want to say that from the very first day of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, one of the most key point activities of our activity is to investigate, record, document, and further support and prosecution of the war crimes against humanity. And among these countless crimes committed by the Russian Federation, the investigators of the State Security Service, together with the Office of the Prosecutor General, are working on investigating the cases of looting and pillage of the Ukrainian cultural heritage. Today we've heard that culture is an important aspect in the insurance of further continuance of Ukrainian statehood. It's important that we have this territorial unity. The overall scale of what is going on, of the overall number of things that have been looted or lost, it might take years to work on that. Therefore, it's important to ensure that that we adhere to the Hague Convention, and we hear that such designators must adhere to the provisions. They must not use the objects that can be somehow or other violated or damaged or whatever. Therefore, within the activity of the State Security Service of Ukraine, and in order to ensure our activities, we see that these rules of international law are ignored, disregarded, and deliberately not taken into account. Now we see that there are a lot of proceedings opened because there was looting, pillage, or other violations against the cultural property. We see that what is going on here is to distort historical truth and creating grounds for the doubts of the national identity and self-determination. We know that Russia has taken barbarous steps in order to deliberately destroy the cultural heritage, the cultural sites, cultural values, in order to then sell them on the black market. Speaking in figures, today the State Security Service has documented ruination and damage to 902 cultural sites because of the invasion of the aggressor country. The most adamant were mentioned already today. It's on the 25th of February 2024 that destroyed Ivankiv historical local museum that showed the collection of objects, culture from the personnel in the region. On the 16th of March 2022, there was an strike in Mariupol drama theater. It was a very high-profile case. Moreover, people were there in the shelter. The building of the drama theater is a monumental cultural heritage and included there. Moreover, Russians were very cynical by hiding the ruins of the theater behind the posters, and then they destroyed what was left of it in the December of that year to again show what they did to destroy Ukrainian identity. On the 16th of March 2022, there was Skovoroda Museum under attack, which is the museum of national importance. Moreover, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation was very cynical to report a strike against the museum because they were so-called servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. Moreover, Kupiansk local museum was destroyed in the Kharkiv region. And after investigating this situations, it was clear that there was no military personnel or military equipment. Therefore, it could not lead to any military advantage for the enemy. For now, the State Security Service is conducting systemic work in order to investigate the looting and pillage of the museums from the temporarily occupied territories. We got the evidence that from the Kherson Museum and Novakhovka Museum, there were 15,000 exhibits stolen. Also, the same was done to Berdyansk Museum and to Melitopol Museum. I want to say that the State Security Service, together with the police of Spain, held international operation when there were two members of this group were held who tried to take care of the cultural who were trying to sell the cultural property of the so-called Thysian gold. Moreover, the persons who wanted to sell it were the clergymen of the Russian Orthodox Church. Then we see that over 1,000 objects were taken back to Ukraine that were somehow rather related to Ukraine. That means that for now, the State Security Service, together with the Office of the General Prosecutor Office of Ukraine and other law enforcement agencies, are further documenting the acts taken by the aggressor state and its cronies. Our priorities are establishing persons responsible and bringing them to responsibility and bringing back such objects into the territory of Ukraine. I also want to say that an important tool in order to preserve cultural heritage of Ukraine and verifying the cultural heritage and assessing the damages suffered by Ukraine and the violations by Russian Federation of the international humanitarian law rules. There is register which together with the NGOs and Ministry for Culture are filling this register, which will be used in the process of proving the violations of international humanitarian rules by the aggressor state. I want to say that preserving Ukrainian cultural heritage is very important in this context of such full-scale invasion. And also at the end of my address, addressing our international friends and partners, I want to thank you for support that we receive at all stages of documenting and investigating war crimes committed by the aggressor state in the territory of Ukraine. I hope that this help and support will contribute to victory over Russian aggressor. Thank you so much. I know that Vane had a question. I'm ready. And Vane, I guess I will ask myself this question, or you will ask those questions.
And the question is, what happens to much of this stolen artifacts? I mean, how does the black market work? Do you understand my question? I'm trying to understand the route of how this property gets taken out of Ukraine, but then what is the black market? Is it an international black market? Is it a black market within Russia? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I can say that for today, it goes without saying that it's very highly unlikely to uncover all the logistical routes and all the persons involved in distributing our cultural artifacts all over the world. I'm not sure that we know everything, but I'm sure that I can say that we understand that such a policy is a part of the elements of Russian aggression. So I can say that in this process we see the involvement of higher political leadership of the Russian Federation and the service personnel that are given these tasks, as it was in the Kherson Art Museum when the cultural heritage objects were taken out of that museum. Again, I was saying about the operation in Madrid. In this case, artifacts were taken by smugglers and by smuggling routes. Moreover, we analyzed online collections of Hermitage and the State Art Museum of Russia, and we found we have found huge number of such artifacts that were taken from Ukraine to Russia at different times. Thank you.
Thank you, Yevhen. I'm sure we'll come back to this subject, but it does raise the question of how complicated it is to investigate these crimes. As with the abduction of children, the abduction of civilians generally, investigation has to start obviously in Ukraine, but it can span into Russia and across the world. And so we are dealing with a very complicated set of facts and a very complicated investigation. Vitaly Kasap, I think, can talk about how complicated this is and how important it is that there is international cooperation on these issues. He's the Deputy Director of the International Police Cooperation Department of the National Police of Ukraine. He's got 30 years of service in different positions in criminal investigations departments, including 3 peacekeeping operations across the world, Kosovo, Bosnia, and also extensive experience in Ukraine. So, Vitaly, what is your assessment of the current state and prospects of international law enforcement cooperation in combating the trafficking in stolen goods? Could you give us an insight into cooperation and how important it is?
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to participate in this very important panel discussion. Colleagues, just to start with the things which have been already mentioned, but I believe it's important to say. The cultural heritage of a nation is not just a collection of artifacts and monuments. It is the soul of a society, a testament to its history, identity, and values. Yet, in times of conflict and turmoil, this heritage becomes a target for exploitation and destruction. The priceless artworks have been looted, smuggled, and may end up in a black market, fueling organized crime and funding further violence, not to mention a clear genocidal objective of Russia behind such crimes trying to suppress our identity. Colleagues, few words about the role of the National Police of Ukraine, which I'm representing here in the investigation of war crimes committed in Ukraine. Together with other law enforcement agencies, the National Police of Ukraine engage all its available resources to respond and document the war crimes committed by Russian Federation in Ukraine. Police investigators, being largest in numbers and widely dislocated in all the regions of Ukraine, respond to and document around 95% of all the crimes, war crimes committed in Ukraine, including the crimes against the cultural heritage. The cases of looting of cultural heritage and values were documented in the deoccupied territories, mostly in the Kherson region, which later on were handed over as per the competency to the Security Service of Ukraine on further investigation. Despite all the challenges we see related to the war in Ukraine, then we continue to serve and protect our people, detect and investigate different types of crimes, including the general criminality, with a particular focus on fighting the firearms trafficking in Ukraine, also transnational organized crime. In the face of such challenges, the international cooperation has got a paramount importance for the law enforcement community of Ukraine. So, responding to the question of moderator, what are the available instruments we have in place at the moment, speaking about the international cooperation? The National Police of Ukraine International Police Cooperation Department is acting as a national central bureau of Interpol, as well as a national contact point of Ukraine on cooperation with Europol. As you know, both organizations are extremely relevant and important for our current tasks. but very different in their instruments as well as available mechanisms. Both organizations provide their efficient and secure communication channels for their members to exchange information and organize police-to-police cooperation. As the Interpol NCB Kyiv, our department coordinates law enforcement cooperation between the relevant Ukrainian, foreign and international institutions in many areas, including in the field of counteraction of the crimes against cultural heritage, by sending requests for the publication of the Interpol General Secretariat respective alerts on stolen cultural values in order to establish the allocation or for the identification of such objects on the basis of the data provided by Ukrainian law enforcement agencies within the relevant open criminal proceedings or on operational cases. It is important to note that Interpol General Secretariat operates a database of stolen works of art called Protection System for Cultural Heritage, which currently contains information on more than 52,000 objects from 134 member states. Among them, there are 218 objects from Ukraine, which mostly were placed before the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation against Ukraine. As the national contact point of cooperation with Europol, our department supports and organizes and coordinates transnational cooperation of all Ukrainian competent authorities within the area of Europol's mandate, which mostly focuses on transnational organized crime and terrorism. I was privileged to work during the last 2 years as a representative of Ukraine and its law enforcement agencies in Europol, in our liaison bureau there, and I'm very thankful for the support which is offered and provided by member states and Europol itself and its management to Ukraine in this difficult time for us in investigation of different types of crimes, also including the crimes of core international and war crimes. The specialized unit within European Serious and Organized Crime Center of Europol contributes to disrupting criminal networks and recovering stolen cultural artifacts. With its expertise, the unit provides an assistance to Ukrainian law enforcement authorities in uncovering and addressing instances of cultural goods theft. The mechanism of cooperation with Europol remains unified. Ukrainian law enforcement agencies should send the relevant request via the secure channel of communication called Siena, and then the relevant support from Europol as well as other interested competent authorities and member states is provided. One of the latest examples of cooperation with Europol in this area is an ongoing police operation between Ukraine and one of the EU member states that have recently detected around 7,000 artifacts that seem to be looted in the past years in the Balkan region and by the Black Sea, which is possibly originating also from Ukraine. Within this case, the operational meeting will be held at Europol next week, where the police investigator will attend and participate, as well as the head of the Cultural Heritage Department of the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine. Apart from instruments of these two police organizations, as well as legal assistance mechanisms, we continue to establish the bilateral cooperation with our international counterparts, which is where lately we see an extensive progress and interest for cooperation, including on the investigation of crimes against cultural heritage, aiming at tracing and recovery of looted cultural values. Different countries have different standards of documentation of the relevant crimes, and we need to cooperate closely with them, especially those which have large potential market for the relevant object sale. Such cooperation will be required for establishment of the relevant mechanisms on prevention and tracing of illegal trafficking of cultural property, particularly those movable items that were stolen and looted from the occupied territories. Obviously, in Ukraine, we have witnessed the wanton destruction and looting of cultural treasures. At the same time, it's clear that at the moment we do not see the entire scale and the picture of problem and cannot document all the facts, considering that we still do not have an access to the cultural goods in the occupied territories. Not yet. It is therefore our responsibility to take decisive preemptive actions against this illicit trade, engaging all available instruments such as Interpol database, Europol, operational capacities, but also developing additional mechanisms of cooperation in this area on bilateral basis. In order to disrupt illicit trafficking networks, we must bolster international cooperation, strengthen legal frameworks, equip law enforcement agencies to identify, track, and repatriate stolen cultural property. There is a need for partnership with private sector, international organizations, those particularly actively directly related to countering of the illegal trafficking of cultural values. We are speaking about UNESCO, UNODC. It's also the International Council on Museum, International Customs Organizations, and so on. Colleagues, we can do it together and only with the long-lasting support of our partners. It's your support, dear colleagues. So thank you very much for the support you have already provided to us, and we count on our future cooperation in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitaly. Could I ask you a follow-up question, please, just for everyone's understanding? Let's say a national police force in, say, Europe, let's say the Netherlands or the UK, for example, stumble across a criminal gang with what looks like possible Ukrainian cultural artifact and trying to sell it. How does it work from that point onwards? How is that then communicated to the Ukrainian police and so on?
For the question, yeah. Well, it depends on the country where the stolen goods are discovered. They have different possibilities. They can communicate, and usually it takes place via the relevant channels of Interpol or Europol. If you ask me, European states lately prefer to use the Europol communication system due to specific objective reasons, which is very efficient and operational, I would say. Immediately, we can receive all the information and provide the relevant data on the stolen goods. If they are stolen, we would respond after the verification of this information. But also on a bilateral basis, we also have our, well, we don't have our representatives, but we have the representatives and police attachés present in Ukraine, outside of Ukraine, serving Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian law enforcement agencies, which can also be engaged in these processes. So we do have the instruments, we do have the channels. It's just a matter of timely communication, informing, and organizing the relevant response and investigation.
And sorry to follow up, but
sure.
Just to try to drill down a bit, who does the investigation in these circumstances? Is that left to the national authorities or Europol, Interpol? How does that work?
Well, it's a matter of follow discussions and investigation. Definitely the initiative will be on the part of the country which is discovering the items. But as continuation of this fact, the relevant joint investigation team can be established between the different countries, and then the fact will be investigated starting from the very first point of the stealing of the and theft of the items, but also continue to the trafficking, illicit trafficking to the other countries, and where they were discovered at the last point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our last panelist, Harsheth Verk, head of the office of UNODC, with extensive experience spanning over 22 years on various UNODC mandates, including in health, drug control, organised crime, and most recently on trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. I won't read her CV, it will take me quite a long time, but what I'm really interested in is what the role of UNODC is in relation to the trafficking of cultural artifacts. Obviously, we are not just talking about war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, although these are the most serious of crimes, but organized crime. Could you talk us through your mandate and how this works?
I think it works now. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting UNODC to this event. And I mean, I think it's a bit difficult being the last speaker in such a distinguished panel. A lot of the interesting stuff has been said already. But from UNODC's perspective, of course, like the rest of the UN, we also draw our mandates from various UN conventions, international conventions. And trafficking in cultural property has been seen as a threat to international peace and security by the UN Security Council, but also by other various conventions that earlier speakers have referred to. For UNODC, we are, of course, interested in seeing it very much through the angle of organized crime. And we are the guardians of the convention on the UNTOC, the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. There is, at the Conference of State Parties to the UNTOC, there was a special resolution looking at addressing trafficking in cultural property, especially looking at illicit financial flows, but also the money through cultural property can be used also by terrorist organizations. I think this was more in reference to what was happening with Daesh and in the Middle East, but I think these are all relevant instruments even in the context we are here in Ukraine. We of course, the important thing for us, and I think we want to assist Ukraine in this, is fully recognizing that this is a country at war with full-scale invasion, destruction of cultural property. But what does this mean, and what are the implications for organized crime in this kind of setting? And you know, if organized crime can get a foothold, which is not uncommon in this kind of environment, and cultural property leaves the country, and then the complexity of actually investigating that case, getting the property back, can be quite time-consuming. And I think our job really is to work with Ukrainian authorities and see if we can assist them in this process. Perhaps we looked at it. I mean, when we look at the sort of overall, in a very broad sense, the supply chain, when we look at cultural property, of course, there's the source countries where there could be what is happening in Ukraine, where there's actual destruction and theft, but also there could be some more small-scale trade as well, which then could most usually moves to an intermediate market where the real smuggling starts. And then finally, of course, the destination, where it basically enters the illicit market. And that's when it gets very difficult, because you're basically, the process really is an illicit product is made legal, and then to get it back to the country is, very complex. And this could take years. It can find these things can find themselves in museums, in auction houses, in member states, and in where it's legal. I mean, so I think along this chain there are entry points for law enforcement, and we want to work and see what's the best time and what's the best value for money also for Ukraine, and also looking very much, of course, at international cooperation. In this context, last year we did two thematic discussions internally in the country with law enforcement representatives, national police, prosecutors, customs as well, border guards, but also Ministry of Culture and other experts, to try and see what the trends are, what the challenges are, what the law enforcement community is facing when it comes to the organized crime side of it. We were, of course, very interested in looking at the financial investigations, the financial flows, so we also worked with the State Financial Monitoring Service on this. We, you know, there's a list of ICOM cultural properties that are at risk in Ukraine, and this includes, I think there's 7 items. It has documents, icons, fine arts. All of these, when we looked at the cases that were presented to us in these forums, all of these are actually, were being trafficked out of the country. But the more interesting thing, perhaps, would be that we also found 2 cases of fossils, which are not, I think, in the ICOM list currently, but, or perhaps, I mean, they are, I don't know, but you know, and the 1970 UNESCO Convention does list fossils as geological heritage as well. And I think this is perhaps something that, you know, we should keep an eye on or look at in the future. So this was something that came up in these discussions that we had. There was, of course, also the case of theft of manuscripts, but I think again and again, repeatedly, the large-scale theft of museum archives, the destruction of records, this was something that, of course, law enforcement is seriously concerned with. But, and you know, I think, especially in Kherson, I mean, I think that came up. And of course, the issue of the erasure of records as well, because if there is no record, there's no digital record, then how does one get the property back from a legal perspective? So I think that's something that obviously, perhaps we need to look at in a little more detail as well. There's not sufficient data right now, at least on the organized crime side, to talk about trafficking routes or trends. But the initial, very, very initial, let's say, notable findings that we had and what we were interested in is that from the cases that we were discussed at these forums, what we found is that cultural property is being trafficked directly to destination countries. Now, usually, this is not very common. It's usually, the more traditional route is that it goes to an intermediate country and then finally to the destination market. But there were cases of direct shipments. And of course, we're trying to understand what the cost-benefit analysis for a trafficker is. Obviously, they understand that law enforcement is very stretched and overburdened at this time. And perhaps, they are obviously looking for opportunities as well. But in addition to vehicles and cargo being used where these cultural property was detected, but the basic, there was also the use of postal shipments, which obviously needs to be looked at a little more. It's difficult to say what the destination countries are in terms of a trend again, but we did see that when it came to destination of the shipments, postal shipments, it was the United States. And which, of course, I mean, globally is one of the largest art markets in the world. And, of course, and so this is not unique to Ukraine. I mean, it would be unusual if it wasn't, in fact. There were a few cases that involved some European member states as well, but it wasn't clear if these are transit countries or if these were the final destination countries. I mean, there were some destined for UK, Germany, the Netherlands, etc. So, I mean, I think I do want to caution and say this is not a trend, but I think since we are a community who's interested in this issue and wants to work on this issue, I think it's worth sharing. I think the other interesting thing that emerged from these meetings was the type of products as well. There was the cases involved archaeological material. I've already referred to fossils, but also specifically there were some ancient weapons that were intercepted, which again raises the question, where is this coming from? Is it lack of security in museums? Is it illegally excavated at archaeological sites? I think the point really is I think there's more questions than answers that I can provide, but at least I think this all is something that we would really urge, in addition to all the excellent work and the very serious work on the war crimes that's going on, perhaps also needs to be looked at. I should conclude my remarks now. I just want to acknowledge, of course, that law enforcement in this country has got an enormous workload. They're doing a tremendous job, but it has to be recognized that we have to help them to do better. And if there's anything we can do in this regard, I mean, we're a small technical UN agency, but whatever we can offer, we are there to offer help. Along with partners, of course. But the other issue, of course, is detection usually takes place at the borders. but investigation is going to take place either from the Office of the Prosecutor General or police, etc. And in this time lag, of course, there are other serious cases as well. And, you know, data can be lost and time can be lost, and cultural property investigations are extremely complex. I don't need to say that because it's at different stages. So this is obviously something that we also need to look at. Just in conclusion, I mean, some of the things that came up from law enforcement and the recommendations from these conferences was really, I think, interagency cooperation within the country. There was, I think that's quite obvious, and I know everybody talks about it, but really to also bring in much more strongly the financial crime side of it, but also, you know, links with ICOM and Ministry of Culture in a more maybe structured manner. The other thing was to look at the legal and regulatory framework. And here I talk a little bit about OSINT. I know there's a lot of requests for OSINT going on, but we also hear of universities and student groups who are tracking, using OSINT and tracking the looting of cultural property online. This is great, and you know, it's great to find this, but when it comes to an investigation, and of course I have the OPG sitting here, how is some of this admissible in court? So I think these are things which also need to be answered, and, you know, and I think probably a little more work needs to be done on this side of it, and definitely more capacity on OSINT as well. And on financial investigations, this came up, and also to strengthen detection of cultural property at borders. With that, I will conclude my remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Harsheth. Before I open it up for questions in the audience, can I just ask a couple of questions about UNODC, just to try to understand operationally how it works? I mean, you mentioned there's a technical unit. That is a technical unit, I presume, in Ukraine. Are there various technical units in different countries? Could you explain that a bit, please? And what does the technical unit do?
I'm so sorry. UNODC is the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. I guess I've been working so long with UNODC, I thought it's self-evident. We are a technical agency based out of Vienna, and our mandates are drawn from the various UN conventions. The 3 drug control conventions, to which Ukraine is a signatory, the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, to which Ukraine is also a signatory, and the UN Convention Against Corruption, to which also Ukraine is a signatory, and then the various instruments on terrorism and justice. We have an office here in Ukraine since 2007. Our initial work focused very much on health, border management, firearms control. We, following the full-scale invasion, re-evaluated our presence and, you know, had to see what is it that we can meaningfully do in Ukraine. And with that in mind, we are now expanding our work, particularly, I mean, also one of the themes that we work on is the trafficking of cultural property. Does that...
That does help, I think. Can I just follow that up, though, with then how do you then help specifically the national authority, for example, the OPG? How can they call upon you to help?
Right. I mean, of course, we're not an operational agency, so we're not going to do a joint investigation team because we are not police. But, for example, and let me give you the example of what we did on, let's say, trafficking in persons last year. We did organize meetings with Polish authorities, with authorities in Netherlands and Austria, between, let's say, OPG and national police and authorities from those countries as well. So I think based on those requests, we can arrange and, you know, provide the UN's, let's say, more neutral platform to get partners together. So this is something that we do on international cooperation, like others as well. But of course, we also have access to a much larger, because a lot of other countries are also signatories to the conventions. So it's not limited just to, let's say, a particular geographical area. We can bring in, you know, cooperation from African countries and the Middle East, etc. But I mean, those kinds of things. And of course, capacity building, training, you know, the usual technical assistance.
Thank you. So I think we've got 10 minutes. So if there's any questions for our panelists, if you want to probe a bit deeper as to investigations and so on, gentleman there in the, I think, orange tie.
Thank you. My name is Neuner from EUAM. I have a question regarding our Ukrainian speakers. We have here all agencies making presentations, particular about incidents against cultural heritage. What I was wondering, while each of them stand on their own to a certain extent, I am interested whether we have among the agencies a kind of common plan to look at what's standing behind each of these incidents. Like, do we have a system which attacks Ukrainian cultural heritage? And what would be the steps each agency contributes towards establishing, investigating, and finally prosecuting the system? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think maybe because it's potentially quite a big question, I'll seek answers now. Yevhen.
Дякую за запитання. Я, мабуть, відповім як керівник органу розслідування.
Thank you very much. I will take this question as a representative of the investigative department. There is indeed such a plan of investigation. As I said, we understand who stands behind these crimes, and what we need now is to restore this chain of responsibility. And in this connection and to this end, we keep in touch with representatives of all investigative, all Ukrainian authorities which are vested with investigative powers in order to build connections and actually not to allow overlapping or dispersal.
Just to add, I'm representing the International Police Cooperation Department of the National Police of Ukraine, and the instruments available under our competence, which I mentioned, the Interpol and Europol, are equally important for using by all competent authorities, including all law enforcement agencies in Ukraine, and they are used by all law enforcement agencies in Ukraine. I haven't stopped on a particular role, level, and activity, which unit and which agency is more engaged or less. But I can assure you that relevant cooperation and mechanism is well known to all law enforcement agencies in Ukraine and very much used. Speaking about the Europol itself, just to mention, because as I said, I was there representing, even though we as a police representing, we as a police were deployed there, but we would represent the interest of all law enforcement agencies, and the number of SSU representatives and representatives of Office of a General Prosecutor were equally, if not more, than the representatives of the National Police of Ukraine attending different meetings. Thank you.
The gentleman in the green, please.
Дякую. У мене питання.
Thank you very much. My question goes to the representatives of law enforcement authorities. So it is clear that you look for the direct perpetrators when investigative certain crimes. But my question is whether you by occasion detected any information through interrogating prisoners of war, for example. So, for instance, when interrogating a soldier or an officer, you find out that something some crime took place. Okay, thank you very much for asking this question in Ukrainian, because I don't have earphones, and the only word I understood from English is the. Now I go down to the response to your question. So indeed, we do interrogate prisoners of war, and it happens that we detect international crimes. In particular, when interrogating prisoners of war, we can use polygraphs. We cannot force them to get interrogated with the use of the polygraph. But if one refuses, then we understand that it means that such a person was directly involved or witnessed an international crime. Answering to your question, we have never detected any crime in respect of cultural heritage just because people refuse answering using polygraph.
With question to Mr. Vitaly Kasap, just a point of clarification. So you just mentioned this register of looted items under the auspices of the Interpol. And if I understood you correctly, since February 22, no artifacts from Ukraine has been added to this database. So my question, and we have seen lots of presentations here about the scope of looting of different museums, etc. So wherever Ukraine ever asked the Interpol to add those items to their database? If yes, what was the answer? If no, then it would be interesting why. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman, for the question. Well, not all of them. I just said mostly, indeed. And then after the beginning of war, the relevant investigation would be undertaken and ongoing. For us, in order to populate the relevant information into this Interpol database, the relevant database, we would need the request of an appropriate investigative authority to do it, with the relevant identified by the rules and regulations of the Interpol information, which is quite detailed. This is exactly what is happening according to my knowledge. The relevant information is collected in order to be submitted to us, for us then to initiate the relevant initiation of the relevant information to be uploaded into the database of Interpol. Thank you.
Any more questions? Actually, can I do a follow-up question for Vitaly? You mentioned, and this follows from Roman's question too, you mentioned in your presentation that there was a need for cooperation in the private sector, and I would add to that civil society sector. I mean, how do you envisage civil society and the private sector being able to contribute to these complicated investigations?
Thank you for the question. Well, it's obvious we are speaking about the goods of arts, yeah, and then where we can see them later on afterwards in a black market or in the museums, in the auctions, in different countries. This is all require the relevant cooperation, establishment of the relevant cooperation and communication with the civil society and the private sector. And just to mention, this is not a responsibility of one particular agency. Yeah? This is something what we count upon when we talk and when we establish the relevant cooperation on a bilateral basis with our colleagues from other states. This is, let's say, the work which needs to be done by all engaged partners, not just in Ukraine, not just by the international police organizations, but also in all those countries where the potential black marking for those cultural goods is the most attractive one. Thank you.
If there's no further questions, it just for me to say thank you to our panelists. Obviously, there's only so much that can be discussed in a panel like this, but I hope you got a sense of how complicated these issues are and what the road ahead looks like and the challenges ahead for the investigative agencies and for the Office of the Prosecution and for international partners. So thank you to Alexei, to Yevhen, to Vitaly and Hasheth, and it's lunchtime, so I'm sure everybody will be happy to hear that. Thank you.